Today I'm going to do a tomato soup cake bake-off, sort of a cake-off. One of my followers asked me to make a tomato soup cake. It's a vintage recipe and I took up the challenge. And I happen to have a recipe book with 2 vintage tomato soup cake recipes in it. And they're both vary a little bit differently. So we're going to make both of them and then we're going to do a taste test and see which is the best tomato soup cake recipe. And I never thought I would be doing a tomato soup cake recipe bake-off, cake-off. Alright, so this is the book that it's from. It is called the the Victory Cookbook. I sadly don't have the cover anymore. It was made and published during the Second World War, and this is the second printing of it, which was done in 1946. These recipes are from New Brunswick, and I happen to be living in New Brunswick, so I'm really excited to try these. Let's get to our cake-off. Our first cake is just simply called tomato soup cake. The directions say to add everything in order and then bake. It doesn't give a temperature or a time, so we're just going to play that part by ear. Our first ingredient is 1 cup of sugar. Half a cup of butter. I've used the guide on the side of the butter to cut the butter. This butter is at room temperature. I'm going to cream these together. One can of tomato soup. Campbell's, of course. Okay, well that didn't look like it was mixing right. As you can see, it's got a really chunky texture that can't be right. So we have switched to our vintage Sunbeam mixer, which happens to have a setting for 1 bowl cakes. Okay, next we are going to add in 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Half a teaspoon of allspice. Now this is a modification by me because my husband is allergic to cloves. The recipe calls for half a teaspoon of cloves. Allspice is a great substitute if you can't have cloves, and very similar in taste. So half a teaspoon of cloves. And we're going to mix that in. Half a cup of nuts. It said any kind of nut is fine. I have chosen pecans. One cup of raisins. And we're going to give that a stir. 1 pinch of salt. The recipe actually just calls for salt. I don't know how much, so I'm just going to add 1 pinch because I don't want to add too much. And 1½ cups of flour. All right, maybe we'll finish this up by hand. Okay, I've cleaned the beaters off, and now I'm going to just kind of mix this stuff all in by hand. It's thick, and with cakes you don't want to mix them too much because you don't want them to be tough. You know, you don't want any gluten to form and it to be bread-like. This is going to be a really thick cake though. You're just trying to get the flour and all of the ingredients moist. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now we're ready to pour it in our pan. This is a non-stick pan, so I'm not going to worry about flouring it. This is so thick. Oh. If you see bits of flour that seem to be on the side, just kind of give them a little rub in. This cake is so thick, we are just going to have to kind of spread it out with our spatula. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. This is in the teal green cake pan so that we can tell them apart. The other cake pan is blue. So this is the tomato soup cake. So let's make the husband cake. This one does not say we have to follow the order, but I think we're going to. So we're going to start by adding 1.5 cups of sugar. 3/4 cup of shortening. You could use butter if you like, but the recipe calls for shortening, so that's what we're going to use. And I'm going to cream these together. And now we're going to add our Campbell's tomato soup. This recipe calls for 1 cup of soup. This can was 284 mils, 1 cup is 250, so I did have to measure it out this time. This already looks better, but I feel like that's due to me and not the recipe itself. So this recipe now calls for 1 cup of cold water. Give that a mix in. One teaspoon of baking soda. 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of cloves, 1 teaspoon of salt. So this cake definitely has a completely different consistency to it. Now for the rest of the ingredients, I'm going to fold them in. So I'm just going to take the mixing bowl off the mixer. I've decided to just fold in the rest of the ingredients based on my experience with the first cake. So we're going to do 1.5 cups of raisins, and these are sultana. It didn't mention which kind to use. I chose sultana. 1.5 cups of nuts. I can give these a stir to incorporate them. This is a much looser cake right now. It's not going to be in a moment. Visually, I'd say it looks better than the first one was just so thick. And now we're going to add in 3 cups of flour. So I asked Google, and Google told me that the best temperature for my oven was 325 to 400. I've chosen to use 325, and that the cooking time, because these recipes don't have any, Google says the cooking time is 20 minutes to 35 minutes. So I have set my cakes for 15 minutes, and then I'm doing 5-minute intervals after that. Wow, this is, okay, this is thick. I would say it's not quite as thick as the first one we did, but I think it's ready to go in the pan. And this time we have a beautiful blue baking pan. They're both the same size, so we're gonna get to really see how they bake by comparison. I mean, this one's so much thicker that it's definitely gonna be different. This one comes out a lot nicer. All right, so here we go, husband cake. Let's bake it. And our cakes are done cooking. We have the tomato soup cake here, and this is the husband cake, which also has tomato soup in it. Let's take a look at them. As you can see, I have the teal ring, the tomato soup cake, and the blue ring for the husband cake. This one is a lot shinier on the top. I think that's because of the butter, and this one is more matte. It looks more cake-like. That could be me. I'm not sure. As you can see, this is fairly thin, and this is fairly thick, but this one did have twice the ingredients pretty much that this one had. Let's give a cut and see what they look like. Okay. Let's check the tomato soup cake first. Okay. First off, this is me, not the cake. It definitely didn't cook quite long enough. And I cooked this one quite a bit longer, but I feel like it's the same issue. It is still needed to be cooked longer. So I had to put these two cakes back in the oven. The centers just were not cooked well enough. I tested them with a toothpick and it wasn't done enough. So it was almost another 20 minutes. I would say all in all, I probably cooked them for almost 40 minutes, maybe a little bit more. I lost track. Do check them as they're cooking if you're making them. And it turned out fine when I put it back in. So here we go. Here's our two pieces. This is the tomato soup cake, and this is the husband cake with tomato soup in it. Look at the difference. I mean, honestly, I expected this because this had so much more ingredients and about twice the flour. Let's taste them. They're very similar in density. They're really, they're like a, oh my goodness, they're like a fruit cake. So this is the tomato soup cake. It's delicious. They're both delicious. It's very moist. I don't get the tomato in it. If you told me, I wouldn't believe you. If I hadn't made it, I wouldn't believe it. It's very good. I'm just gonna break a piece off here. This is really thick. Oops. Oh goodness. All right, so let's take a look at this one. You can see by comparison, it's a lot fluffier. It's still moist. It's still dense, but it's got a nicer texture to it. There's no tomato taste at all. But what I do get is the nutmeg, and I really like it. For me, this cake is the win. This is good. This is really good. So I hope you enjoyed my tomato soup cake off. I have now lots of tomato soup cake to eat and enjoy for the night. I think I'm probably going to slice a little bit of it up and save it for Christmas when my kids are home, and then they can do a little taste test and see what they like the best. If you try this, let me know. If you do a taste test cake off, tomato soup cake off, let me know. I'd love to hear how your results went and what you thought. Thanks for joining me. Bye.